Hello, everyone. I'm Keith DeStone with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and I'm here, as usual, with Greg Nagy and Janet and Elen. Our colleague Sarah is missing this week, but she'll be back. We're here to discuss to talk about the responses to the discussion questions, Greg, that you posed to the v16 cohort in the HeroesX online MOOC. The hour 12 discussion question is as follows. We can say that Homeric poetry, unlike Hesiodic poetry, does not address directly this question, what is justice and what is injustice? But can we say that Homeric poetry does not address this question, what is right and what is wrong? Seems like a very subtle distinction.
Yeah.
But we'll see here. What are folks saying about this one?
Yeah, the one participant is mentioning, does Homeric poetry present the question of justice in the antagonism between the gods and the epic heroes? And he gives an example. For example, Achilles, when he drags Hector's body, the god Apollo continues to keep Hector's body in perfect condition. So would this be an example of what is just and what is unjust?
Well, a lovely observation by this participant, but the thing is that in Homeric poetry, something like the disapproval of the gods, when it comes to the treatment of Hector's corpse by Achilles, is not expressed in terms of dikē, which we translate as justice long-term and judgment short-term. Not even as judgment. They're having a council of the gods in 24, in Iliad 24, and it's clear that the vast majority of the gods, with some notable exceptions, disapprove of the behavior of Achilles. So there's no doubt about that. But just as I tried to say in my question, you and I, in our own English or French vocabulary, would say, well, this isn't right, what Achilles is doing. But all I'm saying is Homeric poetry does not put it in terms of a judgment of what is just and what is unjust. I'll put it that way. Right and wrong, yes. Yes, there is moral judgment in the Homeric epics, but it amazes me that it's not expressed in terms of dikē. Whereas in Hesiod, as we well know, by the time we get to hour 12, dikē is all over the place. It's like a pervasive way of making moral judgments. So in a way, I'm being maybe overly text-based and language-based in saying, look, dikē is missing. That word as a moral criterion is missing in Homeric poetry, whereas it's all pervasive in Hesiodic poetry.
A few posters talk about will of Zeus. In Homeric poetry, we don't have right and wrong explicit say, but whatever Zeus says goes in Homeric poetry. Then posters are saying, but we are disagreeing ourselves by saying Zeus changes his mind. It's not absolute morality, and it's a messy place. Olympus is a messy place.
It's funny that I've heard many people talking about THEODICY, which would be etymologically of the gods, Theo, and dikē, justice of the gods. as if Homeric poetry kept talking about dikē this and dikē that, but Homeric poetry doesn't do it. And I remember when, especially people whose native language is French, when they say the Odyssey, it sounds like the Odyssey. and so it's very easy for Americans in their dialect of English to say, oh, these people are just talking about the Odyssey, not the Odyssey. Theodikia, which is again a projection on Homeric poetry that isn't there. So maybe another way to ask this whole question is why the word dikē is not used in Homeric poetry. Okay, there are two exceptions. In the Iliad, there's a big storm where Zeus is very angry at a population, and the word dikē actually occurs as people who are behaving unjustly, but that's in a simile. It's not even in part of the actual telling of an epic event. And in the Odyssey, it's where Odysseus in disguise compliments Penelope. Oh, madam, you're like a just king. And everything flourishes. And there the expression is eudikia, is a state of prevailing dikē. But there too, it's a comparison. It's not really a direct narrative of epic action that is narrated by the master narrator. Let's call him Homer. So what is this about dikē? Maybe it has to do, I think, with the workings of the cosmos. And maybe, just maybe, if I'm right, that the world of heroes is a world where even gods are dysfunctional. Might have something to do with looking at the cosmos as yet dysfunctional, still dysfunctional, and therefore you can't really talk about dikē. Whereas in Hesiodic poetry, shall we say, the encounter between Hesiod and his unjust brother Perseus is supposedly happening in a post-epic world. I'm not saying that Hesiod himself is not heroized. If you're looking from the standpoint of the present and looking backwards, but I am saying that the world of Hesiod and the world of Perseus, the unjust brother, is not the world of epic heroes. It's post-epic. I made life difficult for myself too with that question, didn't I? Here I have to keep explaining and explaining and explaining myself, I guess.
I wonder if we see the workings of dikē without the word, say Zeus as king giving a decision occasionally in the Iliad. I mean, that's the way Hesiod describes the workings of dikē, is the speech of a king.
I think you're right here, Keith. But
for some reason, it's withheld. The wording.
Here's something that when you think about similes, that is to say, these amazing, almost lyrical comparisons that pervade the Iliad and Odyssey. You ask, what is the time frame of that? Are these points of comparison timeless, or are they timed to coincide with epic action? I don't think they're coinciding with epic action. I think you can relate to similes. Like, I'll give a fanciful one where a little boy is building a sandcastle. That's so timeless. Why should we think of that as going back to the age of epic heroes? No. It's life as it is lived, quote unquote, today. You see what I'm saying? And so so the fact that you have these comparisons, and even in the Iliad and the Odyssey, having explicitly the word dikē or a derivative of the word dikē, it's still post-epic, even though it is in epic. I'm not sure I'm totally happy with my answer, and I think we could explore this question even further about what are the time frames that we see in Homeric poetry. But when you say, Keith, that in a way everything works out to create a world of dikē, I would say you're absolutely right, and not just in similes. But what about the ending of the Odyssey, where it looks as if there will be a vendetta, or I'll pronounce it in the way English speakers, American English speakers pronounce it, vendetta. Vendetta, the Italian word, comes from Latin vindicta, which we still borrow into English as vindictive, vindictiveness, etc. And what happens at the end of the Odyssey? There is no vendetta. And why? It's because Athena, and Athena as an agent of Zeus, and I think you're quite right, Keith, in focusing on Zeus for the moment. The divine order, let's say, says to people who are about to engage in vendetta, including Odysseus himself and his father and his son, no, it stops right here. No more vendetta. And spoiler alert, when we get to the 3 dramas of Aeschylus that we'll be reading very soon, we'll see that there too the divine order says no more dysfunctionality as represented by vendetta, which is an endless chain of revenge. But now there will be the rule of law, and that is dikē. But that's now. That's not then.
And something else that will happen when we get to the tragedies is that the reading will be much lighter. So, dear participants, take heart in your work for the course.
Yes, I could. Yes, Keith is so right. It is the hardest primary readings we have in this course are the Iliad and then the Odyssey in that order. And the Odyssey gets already much easier, I think, even though it's such a complex masterpiece of a narrative, but it's still easier than reading the Iliad, which is really the hardest thing. And I think the mortality rate of readers dying off and not finishing the Iliad happens already in Iliad 2, when people get to the catalog of ships and they say, okay, I give up.
The Iliad doesn't only kill its own characters, you're saying.
Yes, it can kill its readers, but that's because we're readers and we're not invested in the genealogies of these heroes looking forward in time. Whereas Greeks, even in the 5th century, although most Athenians, for example, couldn't trace themselves back beyond their grandparents, just like us moderns, most of us. So they have a very flimsy idea of what their ancestry is, but there is a kind of atavistic notion that somehow the heroes of the distant past are somehow related ancestrally, even if the family tree is very murky.
Well, let's look at the other part of the discussion for this week that comes in response to this question. How do your readings in Herodotus help you see more clearly the nature of heroes in the Homeric Iliad and Odyssey? Please give a specific example. What examples are being given here?
This question is difficult to answer, says one participant. And yes, and he doesn't at first recognize things that refer to heroes from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey But in the story of Solon and Croesus, the fact that Solon tells Croesus that all bios is better granted when the candidate has reached a proper telos,
Yes.
then that, connects a little bit better with Homeric poetry.
Yes. Well, I guess one way to continue the thread of thought from the previous question and the wonderful responses to that question in this case is again a character like Telos or Cleobis and Biton, characters like that, they are post-epic. They're heroes, but in a sense that distinctly heroic age, that would be earlier. That would be what is represented, what is narrated in, for example, the Iliad and the Odyssey. But generations of heroes after that, they're post-epic, and they're just not the same. And in a sense, what is more of a wonder to me is here's the so-called father of history, a kind of prototype for looking at the world not through the lens of epic, but looking at the world through prose, and prose would be designed to address the situation in the present and work our way back to the heroic past rather than the other way around. And to me, the fact that the so-called father of history, in starting his narration about, may I put it this way, the history of the world history, starts with let's call it a parable about what a hero is, and what it is to be a cult hero who is olbios in death, and how if we make connection, it doesn't have to be physical, it can be mental with heroes. If you do that, you get a chance at understanding what a cult hero is and what it is to be possibly initiated into an afterlife, even for us, along the models of what our ancestors experienced. If indeed our ancestors can somehow be connected all the way to the world of heroes, even if we don't know how, because, hello, we're just citizens of a city. But the city knows that we all have some kind of heroic past, whether it's vicarious or whether it's genealogically, quote unquote, provable.
You answered mostly my question, but this poster said Herodotus makes it much more clear just how important and central hero cult is for the society. Yeah. Now, from Homeric tradition to more authorship, we are talking about one person, Herodotus. And this person is making the connection and explaining the past,
yes,
to the current society. What kind of society are we looking at the time of Herodotus?
Well, we're dealing with the problematic world of today, where we humans are definitely not perfect. Oh my goodness, we're not, and where, in a sense, the emphasis is on how we mortals, we humans of the here and now, just mess up all the time. Whereas if we now look back at the cosmos as a timeless something, then even if we are morally defective, at least the rituals that regulate our lives even in their everyday aspects, although rituals, of course, are concentrating on the non-everyday aspects of our life, somehow the way the world of heroes is brought into our consciousness by way of ritual, that is to say, the myths about heroes are ritualized in our cycle as a body politic, that is reassuring. So even if we're messed up, it's reassuring that somehow there's something going on that can improve us, that can save us. And as we'll see when we finally get to Plato in hours 22 and 23, even Socrates appreciates that myth can make us better, even though, of course, Plato's Socrates has a big quarrel with myth and poetry as distinct from philosophical thinking. But we'll get to that. I'm almost spoiling it. Yeah. Spoiler alert.
All right. Well, let's pause here in our conversation and return next week for hours 14 and 15. All right.
I can hardly wait. This will be a very exciting transition.
See you all then.